Hello and welcome to Scientists for Open Science, PLOS's ongoing campaign that brings researchers and stakeholders together from around the globe to share perspectives on open science and open research. My name is Dan Morgan, the Director of Communications and Community Relations here at PLOS, and I'm joined today by Dr. Marcus Munafò to have a conversation about community building in open research. And Marcus, I'd just like to invite you to give a brief introduction to yourself.
Thanks. So my name is Marcus Munafò. I'm a professor of biological psychology at the University of Bristol. I'm based in the School of Psychological Science, but I'm also part of the MRC's Integrative Epidemiology unit there. And my own research is on health behaviors, smoking, drinking, and mental health, using a range of methodologies. But I've had this long-standing interest in research culture, research quality, the factors that influence that really can be traced all the way back to my PhD. And that has constituted part of my own research over the years, but has also led to my interest in how we can actually look at ways in which we might be able to improve the culture within which we work, or the quality of the work that we produce. And that led to me contributing to the founding of the UK Reproducibility Network.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So yeah, you just mentioned it. So could you tell me more about the UK Reproducibility Network, kind of how it came about, any successes you're proud of, and organizations that may have inspired you in your activity?
Well, it can be traced back to, I guess, a meeting that was held by the Academy of Medical Sciences in, I think it was possibly 2013, but it was held at the Wellcome Trust, hosted by the Academy of Medical Sciences in the UK, that was to discuss these issues of reproducibility that had started to gain traction following the publication in 2005 of Johnny Ioannidis' paper on why most published research findings are false. And those discussions had reached funders and publishers, and so this meeting was convened by the Academy to discuss what the issues were and what might be done. And it became quite clear at that meeting that there was certainly a need for action and some degree of coordination of that action, but the challenge was that there was no single organization that felt that it was their sole responsibility to deal with all of that at the same time, if you like. And it was also clear that there were several academics in the UK and internationally who were very engaged with these issues, and that by working collectively, we could potentially drive the agenda forward more successfully. So people like myself and Dorothy Bishop and Chris Chambers and others started talking about what we might be able to do, started lobbying funders to take these issues seriously, but also support the efforts to address these issues. And over a period of time, we managed to build enough momentum to bring all of those different stakeholders in this issue together, the funders, the publishers, the learned societies, researchers themselves. And we had a meeting at the end of 2018, I think September, in Bristol, where we talked about the need for some kind of mechanism that could coordinate this activity across different funders, publishers, and so on. And that was where the idea of this reproducibility network was born. And with the support of many of those stakeholders, particularly the funders who gave us a small amount of resource to actually get this thing off the ground, we launched in March 2019. So we haven't been around for very long, 2.5 years. And the basic idea is that we have created a structure that allows coordination at various levels. So we have local networks, for example. Those are self-organizing groups of researchers at different institutions that are very much the voice of the grassroots community. They run journal clubs, they run seminar series. They vary from the very small to the quite large, to from the more informal to the more formal. Many are led by early career researchers. Part of our model is to have enough flexibility to allow different solutions, if you like, in different contexts. So we have those, I think, at 57 institutions across the UK now. We then also have institutions that have joined formally, and by joining formally, an institution will create a senior academic lead role focused on the senior management level, if you like, and addressing issues like incentives, hiring criteria, promotion criteria, training, and so on. And the idea is, or the model is, that each institution would ideally have both of those roles filled, a local network lead and an institutional lead, with those two working in partnership, advocating for each other in both directions, if you like, and also challenging each other as to what the issues were within that institution that needed addressing, the grassroots voice and the role that is focused on holding senior management's feet to the fire, if you like. And at the moment, we have 20 institutions across the UK that have joined formally. And then we have a layer of external stakeholders, the funders, the publishers, the other sectoral organizations. And the idea is that that structure allows us to coordinate across those layers. So we try to get all of our local networks working collaboratively and sharing effective practice and doing more or less similar things across those different networks. Similarly, at the institutional level, and we're also brokering conversations between funders and publishers to see how their activities around, for example, promoting open research can be aligned. But we can also create links across those different levels. So when UKRI was interested in setting up this UK Committee on Research Integrity, which it's now launching, we were able to put them in touch with a number of our local network leads so they could get a sense of what the perspective from that grassroots community of researchers was in relation to this committee they were proposing. And that structure is the part that I think is particularly powerful, because it allows that coordination and that gathering of energy and enthusiasm.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. That sounds like the perfect mix of, as you say, the grassroots stuff, but then people in kind of systemic, infrastructural positions of influence. And I think, if this is all a drive towards, better research culture and normalizing good open research practices, I mean, I'd imagine that this kind of peer-to-peer kind of community building is super important to kind of improve and influence that.
I mean, that's the hope. And certainly internationally, there is a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm for doing things better, differently, for innovating, for looking at what works and what doesn't work. And that, we hope, has been captured through these local networks. But as you say, it needs to be connected to the other parts of the system, and in particular, the parts of the system that have levers that can be brought to bear. Institutions, I think, hold or are repositories of much of our culture, because they are the ones that create the incentives through job descriptions, through promotion criteria, and so on. Similarly, funders and to an extent publishers as well are able to exert influence over how we work through the kinds of demands that they make or the ways in which they shape grants, calls, and so on. So all of those different elements need to be part of any solution, and it is a real systems problem, and coordinating and linking across those is going to be really important, I think. And in terms of building community, you're right that I think it's very easy to feel alone if you're a lone voice for someone, proposing open research practices within your school, and there's just not a particular enthusiasm for that around you. And so by creating this group of local network leads that can work collaboratively together, we can hopefully create that sense of community. And one of the things that we've just done over August has been to host a residential retreat for our local network leads, where we could deliver some activities, some training, some professional development work. We did some stuff around leadership, for example, but actually the main purpose of that was bringing everyone together, making them feel part of a community, giving them an opportunity to share experiences, share effective practice, learn from each other. And the feeling that I got from that retreat was that they came away, those that attended, with even more energy to start working on, what they could really do on the ground to address these issues.
Sounds fantastic. I mean, the way I often frame it and hear the issue framed is that, which it seems that all these activities are heading towards, is to, again, it's that word again, to normalize it, rather than have these be administrative burdens or always like carrots or sticks or kind of, things that are kind of seem external to your daily habits or daily kind of activities. It seems that this is absolutely crucial to have this just as the way things are done, right? Just the absolute normality of good research is done like this. What are some of the most important things, like within, research culture and research practice, that you think such communities can help with or achieve or have already influenced?
Well, for us at the moment, I think open research, transparency in research more generally, is something that we feel has a really important place in this wider discussion around research integrity and research culture, for a number of reasons. I mean, there are arguments that by sharing the intermediate artifacts of a research process, if you like, rather than simply the final output, we can recognize more granular contributions to a research process and allow that to be recognized on people's CVs, in the hiring and promotion processes, and so on. We can also allow for reuse of those intermediate artifacts, even if they contribute to a different ultimate research output than the original one. So you can create efficiencies that way. There is an argument that if those research processes are publicly funded, then it's right that they should be available for scrutiny. There's also an argument that that scrutiny that's possible when a research process is more transparent allows for greater error control. More people can check those intermediate steps and critique them. The fact that people can check and critique those intermediate steps then encourages more internal quality control, because people don't want an error to creep into their work. We have to recognize that research is a human endeavor. So there are going to be errors, and anything that can increase the degree of quality control and checking that happens will serve to mitigate that. Now, many of those are arguments that are as yet relatively unevidenced, although evidence is growing all the time because of the meta research activity that's happening. So I think we need to recognize that we also need to be looking at what works, whether it works as intended, whether there are any unintended consequences. But for all of those reasons, I think there's a strong argument to consider open research as being an important part of a move towards a healthier research culture, and one that generates higher quality outputs.
Yeah, no, it's I look forward to the meta research, on it. I think you identified one of my, whether I say favorite, but my most particularly interesting tension, that kind of tension between the people that don't like transparency because it releases unchecked and potentially error-prone research into the world, and then the people that say, well, yes, but that's the point, it is there for better error correction and the normalization of like community kind of, error correction. And yes, exactly. I feel like the community building that you're involved in, it just helps everybody become more comfortable with that rather than, just afraid of it. So is there any specific reason, and I'm asking this of everyone we're interviewing this week, but is there any specific reason or kind of point or waypoint that you individually became interested in open research and reproducibility?
So there are two aspects of my career that fed into this. I'm not sure I could point to a single moment where there was a sort of flash of light or anything, but first of all, I've had an unusual career in that I've moved around lots of different departments, schools, and worked across lots of different disciplines, which has been great actually, because what I've learned is that every discipline does something well, and every discipline has something to learn from every other. So I started out doing an undergraduate degree in philosophy and psychology, went to do a master's in health psychology, and that continued through to my PhD, which was in a very sort of applied context. Then went to work in a public health and primary care department, where I was introduced to the Cochrane collaboration and the notion of systematic reviewing and meta-analysis. Then I moved to a clinical pharmacology department, where there was a lot of molecular genetics research happening, and I was exposed to that kind of wet lab side of things. Then to a psychiatry department, a very clinical context, and then back into a psychology department, but working with a group of epidemiologists and ultimately in an epidemiology unit. So was able to draw upon lots of different aspects of how those different disciplines work. And when it comes to open research, for example, that kind of wet lab basic science research has more of a culture of sharing materials and reagents. Clinical research has a culture of pre-registering study protocols, for example. This isn't to say that these things are all done perfectly, but those were just things that were relatively normative within those different disciplines. And so I could draw on those. Alongside that, really from my PhD, I'd begun to realize that things were not as they seemed in terms of the scientific literature. One of my early experiences, which I talk about quite regularly in the talks that I give, is that one of the first experiments that I tried to run during my PhD was one that was effectively a replication study of this apparently nailed on finding that the literature would suggest, would be easy to replicate, and I didn't replicate it. And of course, my reaction as an early career researcher was, well, I must have done something wrong. And in fact, I was lucky enough that some senior academic told me, well, actually, that's a really flaky finding. No one can replicate that find. Well, not no one, but it's harder to replicate than you might think from all of the published papers on it, where it all looks like it's, all going to go swimmingly. So that was interesting to me. I thought, well, how was I meant to know? Because no one was publishing these. It was only because I happened to speak to this person that I found out. Then when I went to work on pharmacogenetics of smoking cessation, looking at candidate gene studies in the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s, when those studies were done, I again realized that this was the literature where actually the findings were much flakier than you might think from what was published. And actually that literature did a reasonably good job compared to many of publishing null results. I then took the expertise I'd learned working with the Cochrane collaboration and started to do meta-analyses of candidate gene studies. And what was interesting about that was that not only were the findings in those meta-analyses much less robust than a simple casual read of the literature might suggest, but there were also patterns in those literatures that suggested, for example, a correlation between the published effect size and the year of publication. And that decline effect, that effect sizes tend to decline over time, is now pretty well established across a range of different contexts, but that was reasonably new at the time and striking to me. And it piqued my interest that you could use the scientific method to understand patterns in how science works and papers are published and so on. And that was why when Johnny Anidis' paper came out in 2005, for me, it felt a bit like we were talking about earlier, this sense of, I'm not alone in thinking this, I'm not alone in finding this weird. There are other people out there doing similar research. And at that point, it started to sort of move from describing how things are and how things might be problematic to moving on to thinking, how can we do things better and what are the potential solutions to this?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asking this of everyone as well, but I've been asking everybody, are you more hopeful for the future because of all these things that are going on? And I can already hear kind of one thing in that you might not have to rely today on just happening to talk to a senior academic, encouraging you to look into the reproducibility of the study and the fact that you might actually just have that immediate community support from anybody to do that. But it sounds to me that we're in a better place than we were a few years ago with encouraging this kind of, confidence and kind of questioning the scientific methods, scientifically, and just understanding that it's not anything we have to, again, be nervous about or worried about. We just have to be aware of and study.
I think that's right. I mean, these are not new conversations. One of the, when I first started giving talks on this stuff back in the sort of early 2000s, I had a slide about taking or drawing on Charles Babbage's paper from 1833 on, reflections on the decline of science in England, just to point out that many of these conversations are not new. And I think we need to recognize that these conversations around things aren't great and maybe we could do better have been around for a while and sort of tend to be cyclical. Fiona Fiddler at the University of Melbourne makes a good point, or she asks what's different this time, and she argues that one of the things that's different is that we are just more connected now through things like social media, which allows people to realize that they're not alone much more quickly than say I did. And I think that can be quite powerful when it comes to building communities and drawing people together. And so I do feel optimistic. I feel optimistic partly because it feels like this time things are slightly different because there's much more momentum behind it now because of things like social media and the internet allowing that community building. And I like the quote that revolutions happen very slowly and then all at once. And, I've been, as others have been, banging on about this stuff for the best part of 20 years. And it's felt like it's been going nowhere for long periods within that. And there's been lots of resistance from people who are, perfectly comfortable with the status quo, or just unconsciously systems have inertia and they can be hard to shift. But now it feels like a lot is happening and a lot is happening very quickly. And in the UK alone, for example, we have the UK's R&D people and culture strategy. We have all of the activity around research culture and research integrity that's happening. We have the Committee on Research Integrity being set up. It really feels like we're getting to the point where people are not only taking this seriously, but starting to look at how we can do things differently, how we can evidence what's working, and how we can actually connect up the different bits of the system so that the things that we're doing really drive change forward.
Yeah, that's true. I've also heard some people talk about, what's different this time is sometimes people think it's a bit more frustrating because there's so much like technological innovation alongside it this time, or like innovations like new people coming up with, well, I think we'll fix it by having this kind of publishing platform or this type of article type or this type of way of doing peer review. And I think there's so much kind of ideation and innovation right now that when it doesn't have like an immediate effect, you just kind of think, oh, well, it's just, there's this kind of a greater sense of frustration, but, I do see community building, such as you're involved with, such as is going on in various places around the world. It's like such a big key. And yeah, I definitely like what you were saying about Fiona Fiddler saying that, yeah, social media could be the difference. We're just so much more aware of it this time around too.
And you're right that it's simply possible to do things now that were much harder even a few years ago. So things like data sharing, for example, sharing materials, sharing code online is so much more straightforward now. I remember when I was doing my PhD at the University of Southampton, I worked with Stephen Harnad, who was really one of the first proponents of open access, and asked the question, do we need journals? Do we need print journals? And tried to set up online only journals that existed but never really took off, partly because he was just so far ahead of his time that the infrastructure couldn't quite support the ambition of what he was proposing. But now it's much more straightforward to do things like that. And there is some really exciting innovation happening and really novel publishing models being proposed. And some will fall by the wayside and some will click. And it may not necessarily be the best ones in an objective sense that click, but to some extent that doesn't matter, because as long as we can get everyone to do things slightly better and just shift the distribution, then the net effect is going to be profound, I think.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, thank you so much. We've covered quite a lot in this short period of time, and I really thank you for your time and speaking so articulately and eloquently about everything going on with the UKRN. Now, is there something coming up for the UKRN that you were talking to me about earlier that you might want to announce?
Well, there are a couple of things actually that are worth mentioning. So the first is, which is really exciting, is that we're starting to see other national reproducibility networks emerge in other countries, modeled on the same structure that we piloted effectively, modeled on our terms of reference. And we have those now established in Switzerland and Germany and Australia and Slovakia, and they're emerging in other countries. There are several across Europe. We're going to have a summit of international reproducibility networks at the end of September, where we'll talk about building an international community or a supranational community of these different networks. And we've also very recently heard that we've received funding from Research England as part of their development fund to support this delivery of open research training across our partner institutions across this network that we have in the UK, to deliver training, to look at evaluating the impact of that training, and to try and embed that open research practice into institutional cultures, with a view to then making much of what we do and what we learn available across the sector, both nationally and ultimately internationally. So it does feel like an exciting time, and I think that says a lot about how much appetite there is at a very high level within the funding landscape, if you like, to support this kind of activity. And I think it's a really nice example of working collaboratively at an institutional level, rather than being individually hyper-competitive, which we're encouraged to be both as individual researchers and as institutions. The sense here is that if we work collaboratively, we can be more efficient, we can be collectively better at what we do. And if you like, a rising tide lifts all boats, we can all benefit from that.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on that grant. And yeah, I look forward to, I've seen a few of those national, beyond the UK kind of centers emerging in Slovakia et al. So look forward to seeing those go from strength to strength as well. Anyway, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for watching. And any references that we've made that can be served with a link will ensure is in the comments of this video. So please check those out. Thank you again, Marcus.
Thank you.